Washington's offensive line got off to a hot start in 2025, and it looks like it's going to be a huge strength for the Huskies.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Unfortunately, no Lars Hansen today. He's a little bit under the weather, but that means that you and I out there, we're going to have a lot of fun on today's show. And just a quick reminder, wherever you get today's podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. Click the little bell, as well as remember when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the channel out a lot. Now, like I said, a lot of fun coming at you on today's show. I want to talk about 5 prospects who could be Washington's first commit in the class of 2027. I want to talk about UC Davis quarterback Caden Pinnick and what he brings to the table and how it's going to be a very different challenge for Washington and that defensive line this week. But I want to start with this offensive line because I think that Washington's offensive line looked tremendous against Colorado State. 283 yards on the ground obviously is a really, really nice number. That's Washington's most since 2023 against USC. And if you take out Dylan Johnson's 256 yards that he had in that game, that's Washington's most since 2017 against UCLA. So obviously a really nice start to Washington's season on the ground. And a lot of that came on the backs of the offensive line. Azzopardi, Carver, Willis, John Mills, all had 80-plus grades per Football Focus against the run, and I think that that's a really nice place to start this off because I look at a guy like John Mills, who has been a frequent topic of discussion on this program through the spring, the summer, the fall. He gets his first career start, and in 53 snaps, he looked like a mauler. I've been really excited about what he's brought to the table for a long time now, even before he committed to Washington when he was a Texas commit for a good long while. Obviously, he took an unofficial visit to Washington before that happened and then flipped a couple days before signing day. But this is the kind of guy when Jedd Fisch was talking about what he was looking for on his offensive line coming into the 2024 season and then before this year as well. It's guys like John Mills at 6'6", 320 pounds, who can just be absolute maulers for you in the run game because that's what you need in the Big Ten. And I think that this is a guy who maybe long-term he kicks out to tackle because of that size, and you're able to get somebody like Paki Finau more snaps or Champ Talia, whoever it might be. Obviously, Cody Green and Dom Harris, some of those guys coming down the pipeline as well, deserve a shout out in this conversation too. But I look at what this line is going to be this year, and I think it got off to a really, really hot start where you don't just look at it that way. The 3 sacks that Damon Williams took were not credited to the offensive line in any way, and a lot of that was due to a blitz rate. And I want to talk about that in a little bit, but I want to stay focused on the run game here for the first few minutes because having a back like Jonah Coleman and obviously a second back like Adam Muhammad, plus a quarterback in Damon Williams who can run the way he does, is going to help you out a lot. But none of this works if the offensive line doesn't work. Where obviously last season we talked about 833 of Jonah's 1,054 yards came after contact. He had 149 of them in the win over Colorado State. But it felt a little bit different where it just felt like last year there were so many different times where Washington's offensive line just lost at the point of attack. And against Colorado State, that wasn't the case. There were just consistently people moving off the ball. Shout out to my good buddy, Evan Feather. He has a really great photo that he posted over on his Twitter of John Mills blocking 2 guys where he's just picking up the defensive lineman and moving them out of the way. And at the same time, moving a linebacker. It's plays like that are just really emblematic of just something Washington didn't have last year. And combining Willis and Azzopardi with Guerin and Landon Hatchett as well, plus Paki Finau, who all had 75-plus grades in the run blocking game, according to PFF. It just shows that this offensive line is headed in the right direction in terms of size, strength, physicality, everything that you want to see in terms of a Big Ten team in the run game. Washington's offensive line showed all of those things against Colorado State. And yes, it is a group of 5 team, but it's something that, again, against Weber State last season, against Eastern Michigan, we saw Washington have success, but not nearly in the same light that we did in this opening win. So I'm really excited to see this group continue to take the next step. I think that this is a unit that has a whole lot of promise and a whole lot to just get excited about in terms of moving forward, because there's so many young guys in this unit that are going to be successful for you in years to come. But the more that I look at this team, I just think that everything is going to start in the trenches. And you have a trio of truly elite players in this conference. I think Damon Williams is well on his way there. Jonah Coleman, obviously, we talked about him on yesterday's show as arguably the best back in the conference, and not even just the conference, in the country at this point in time. Plus Denzel Boston, who's a top 3 wide receiver in the Big Ten. Having those guys is awesome. And yeah, that's a big reason why you got 500 yards of offense in your opening game. But none of that doesn't work without the offensive line. And like I said, the run blocking is great. And now it's just going to be, can all of these guys take the next step in pass protection? And the reason I want to bring that up is when we talked to Carver Willis on Tuesday, I got a chance to ask him just how he felt about his first performance at left tackle after playing on the right side for a couple of years. And he said that he felt good about it, but that there are a lot of things that he felt he needed to improve on. He said he felt like he made some stupid mistakes and a couple different things like that, that with time are going to be just kind of evened out. And I love talking to Carver. He's always very, very open and honest with us about what he feels he needs to do better. And hearing something like that is very refreshing from, again, a group that had a lot of success. Where I feel like some of what he's talking about there is in terms of Damon Williams taking some unnecessary hits. Now, Jimmy Doherty said during the Tuesday presser that a lot of those hits were self-inflicted when you think about him lowering his shoulder and trying to run over safety in the open field, which, hey, as just a football lover, I certainly respect that. But as Jimmy said, having just a little bit of the wherewithal to either get down or just try to get out of bounds in certain cases because you don't want your quarterback taking unnecessary hits is very important. And it's another thing that I know I highlighted a little bit earlier on in the week where there was one of the sacks that he took where it was just an unblocked rusher coming off the edge where you know that that's the play. You know that that guy is going to be the hot read the second that the ball is snapped, and you have to do a better job of getting the ball out of your hands faster. And that's something that I think Jedd Fisch and Jimmy Doherty and this coaching staff are working on with Damon on a day in, day out basis. But at the same point, this is where I want to just kind of harp the offensive line into all of this because, again, like I said, none of those 3 sacks were credited to the offensive line because of the blitz rate that Colorado State had. I can't remember who put it out there on Twitter. Shout out to whoever that was. It was a truly awesome stat of a 70.6% blitz rate from Colorado State. And Jimmy Doherty said that they understood that that was going to be the game plan going in. And then kind of seeing it in action was really interesting because they want to force negative plays on you and they want to force you into making mistakes. And Damon Williams obviously didn't make a whole ton of them, which is nice to see. And it's cool to see from a sophomore quarterback like that, who's making his 3rd career start, that already has the wherewithal and the understanding that under pressure, okay, I know that, in order to keep my completion percentage high, these are the kinds of throws I'm going to have to make. And obviously, I think that as the season goes along, we might see him throw the ball away a little bit more. I'm curious to see if that's something that Jedd asks a little bit more out of him. But when I look at this offensive line in pass protection, I thought it held up really well. And again, yes, Colorado State is an FCS team, but you can only play who's in front of you. And I think that this just kind of bodes well for moving forward as Washington continues this non-conference slate with UC Davis this week and then Washington State in a couple of weeks. And obviously Ohio State is going to be a very different form of test for this offensive line, but I think things are moving in the right direction. And even let's say Washington does lose that game against Ohio State, if you're able to show progress and show that obviously extremely talented defensive line is not just moving you out of the way on every single play, and you're able to win your own battles and stand up to the defending national champions, a lot like the offensive line in 2024 did on a few plays against Michigan. If you're able to just continue to show that growth, I think that bodes really, really well for you for the rest of this Big Ten slate when all of a sudden after that, it's Maryland. And then obviously you got the game against Michigan a few weeks after that. I think Rutgers is the one in between there. There are so many opportunities for very, very winnable games on the schedule where if you look at how this offensive line stacks up with the rest of the Big Ten, I feel like they have a chance to, I know I was talking about them as being an average unit before the season. They have a chance to sneak into that upper half. And I think that's a really exciting thing to think about because the talent on this group is there, it's promising, and it's really young too. But with that being said, let's flip sides of the ball here and let's talk about quarterback Caden Pinnick because I think he's going to be a very interesting challenge for this defensive line. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. They follow what moves them every time they drive. And that's what makes a Mazda stand out. They go beyond safety, style, and performance to deliver a driving experience that feels alive in every detail. Mazda offers more than safety. It's won more 2025 IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. As an athlete focuses on every detail, Mazda does the same, from metallic accents to hand-stitched Nappa leather. You can feel it the moment you get behind the wheel. The smooth handling, intuitive controls, and standard all-wheel drive in every crossover SUV. It's the small details that make the big plays. And just like there's more to every player, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Okay, by far the most important name you need to be aware of for this Saturday's matchup against UC Davis is their quarterback, Caden Pinnick. Really interesting redshirt freshman prospect where I don't need to go into his stats against Mercer because that game was canceled for some reason. I think there was a weather delay. So as I was doing my research on him, not only was he the National Freshman of the Week for his performance last week, where he had 253 yards passing for 3 touchdowns, but he also showed to be a really, really mobile kind of player. So this is an interesting prospect that Washington has had trouble with for a handful of seasons now. It seems like they've had trouble containing mobile quarterbacks. Obviously, we look back on last year's Apple Cup against John Mateer. Everything like that, we don't need to go into it. But I think this poses a really interesting challenge for Washington's defense. I know a lot of everydayers are unhappy with the performance that Washington's defensive line put out there against Colorado State, where 17 pressures, 15 hurries, according to PFF stats, is still a really solid number. And this is something that I think is going to make this performance, even just this matchup, I should say, even more intriguing. Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, Colorado State's quarterback, had a average time to throw, according to defensive coordinator Ryan Walters, of 2.19 seconds. Now, for reference, the fastest time to throw for a quarterback in the NFL last season, on average of guys with over 350 snaps played, was Tua Tagovailoa at 2.23 seconds. The fastest behind him was Cooper Rush at 2.36 seconds. And I feel like this is something that is very much worth noting because that shows that even though Braden Fowler-Nicolosi knew what was coming after him, he was still getting the ball out very, very quickly. And that's something that I don't think can go understated in this matchup, and something where maybe it's going to look a little bit different with Caden Pinnick, who has done a really good job of trying to extend plays and getting outside the pocket at the FCS level. So obviously maybe it's going to look a little bit different, but I think this is going to be a big opportunity for Washington's defensive line to step up, and not necessarily in the way you might think. Obviously, if this, turns into what it was against Eastern Michigan last year, where they had 7 sacks, you're going to be more than happy with that, of course. But I'm really curious as what the plan of attack is going to be and how Ryan Walters is going to want his defensive line to execute. Where Jedd Fisch on Monday talked a lot about having that group just hold the point of attack and keep Braden Fowler-Nicolosi in the pocket and try to not let him extend plays, because I feel like that's something that Caden Pinnick is going to want to do as well, and something that Ryan Walters is not going to want to allow, whether that's Zach Durfee and Jacob Lane or Isaiah Ward just playing contain on the edges and trying to force him to step up into a Bryce Butler or a Linneus Davis or one of these guys that's going to be back from injury like a Deshaun Lynch or a Logan Sagapolo, whoever it might be, Ontario Thompson, Taitaui Ungulay, obviously being other names that you need to throw into this mix. Whatever that's going to look like, I think this plan is just whatever the plan for Ryan Walters is going to become a lot more clear this week, because I think this is the perfect kind of guy where you can try to, yes, get after him, but he's got an ability to get outside the pocket and make you pay. And obviously, as we saw in the first half last week against Colorado State, that's where just the most holes in this defense were exposed were outside the tackle boxes. So I think that if the plan is going to be anything this week, it's try to use your talent advantage in the secondary and just try to keep him in the pocket as much as possible. And if he tries to escape, you think that you certainly have the bodies and the athletes. I'm curious to see whether they want to, maybe try to spy a guy like this and try to play a different kind of coverage where we know it's going to be man coverage on the back end. And that's where I'm just really intrigued to see how much of that press man and just all those different things that Ryan Walters wants to implore. And maybe, it's not sending as much pressure and as many blitzes outside of just, these 5 down fronts and guys on the defensive line, because you don't necessarily need to. And if he's going to try to roll out and make plays, whether it be a Buda Alukta, Devin Bryant, or maybe one of the safeties in Mikel Lassine or Alex McLaughlin, if somebody like that is going to play just a quarterback spy and just stay close to the line of scrimmage and run with him as he rolls out, you certainly have the athletes to be able to do that. So a lot of this comes down to how are you going to try to force him to beat you? And one thing that Ryan Walters was very quick to mention is that he's a really good decision maker. He's very smart and very good about getting through his reads and not trying to take too many risks. He threw one interception in their last game, and I think that that's certainly going to try to be the game plan against Tacario Davis and Ephesian Sprysock on the outside, and whoever may start between Leroy Bryant and Rashawn Clark in the nickel. So as I just continue to dive into this matchup, I think that this is where Washington is going to have an opportunity to maybe not just create sacks, but more so create turnovers, because you're going to just be able to play that suffocating coverage with the talent gap that you have on the outside. So why not maybe force throwaways? And all of a sudden, it's 3rd and long and you can pin your ears back and try to get after the passer. But and the reason I wanted to make sure that this is what we kind of had this discussion about in terms of UC Davis and Caden Pinnick and everything is if Washington's defensive line doesn't necessarily put up the pressures and the hurries and the sacks that you might expect, I feel like this could be a big reason why, because again, that's the number that you want to see that's going to show up in the box score and be, okay, yeah, it's really important. It looked like that kind of guy was under duress all night. But when you relate it back to last week, and again, you think about 2.19 seconds to throw. That is getting the ball, hitting your back foot, and getting the ball out in a hurry. That is really, really impressive to do. And for an experienced guy like Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, which is why I harped on that point so much last week when we had one of these preview segments, is with a guy like Caden Pinnick, who is certainly a little bit more inexperienced, where they had a senior graduate last year after a whole lot of time at the helm, having a redshirt freshman like this, it's certainly going to look a little bit different, and you might be able to bait him into some tough throws. But at the same point, that's only going to happen if you're able to either get pressure on him or just play that suffocating coverage on the back end and try to force him to make a play that he might not necessarily want to, but it looks like that's the only option available. So there's going to be so much pressure put on the defensive line this week to handle their assignments and in pass protection against this offensive line when they're rushing the passer to get home in these one-on-one matchups. Because if you're able to just collapse that pocket, play contain on the outside, and walk everything back from the interior, he's going to just try to make a play, and maybe he walks into a couple more sacks. And again, this is where having a quarterback spy is so important. There are so many different ways that Ryan Walters in a game like this can really figure out what he wants to do. Because as we kind of look down Washington's matchup lists at quarterback, there are a couple of notably mobile guys that stand out who can make plays outside the pocket with their legs. Bryce Underwood being one, Malik Washington being another at Michigan and Maryland, respectfully. I think that this is going to be something where we're going to see a lot more of what Ryan Walters wanted to do. And another reason that I wanted to make sure I discuss that is because when we talk to not only Ryan Walters, but Devin Bryant and Jacob Lane as well, and Jedd Fisch mentioned a little bit during his Monday presser, is a lot of the looks that Washington seemed to struggle with were things that they weren't necessarily prepared for. And it wasn't through a lack of film or a lack of anything else. It was credit to Colorado State, where they put a whole bunch of different packages on the field and different stuff that they just didn't do at all in 2024. So those were things that maybe when we go back and we look at the film, that's why Washington was unprepared or looked like they were caught off guard with certain runs, especially in that first half. So I'm curious to see if that might be a plan from UC Davis where it's, hey, usually we don't do this, so let's run this wrinkle on a certain pass play or on a certain run, or when we try to, get Caden Pinnick outside the pocket, this is how we're going to do it instead of whatever way it might be. I think that these are all things that you should really keep a close eye on because, again, I know I've referenced it a couple of times this week. Bryce Butler, I know that Sione Kaho had a couple of nice reps as well. Jacob Lane had a couple of pressures coming from the outside. I think that there are some different things that Washington still certainly needs to improve on the defensive line. And against an FCS school, this is where you're going to want to see those improvements. But at the same point in time, if we see a different plan of attack and maybe it starts slow and picks up at the end, or maybe the numbers at the end of the game just weren't what you were expecting them to be, I think that this is something you can point to and say the plan for a mobile quarterback might look a little bit different under Ryan Walters than it did under Steve Belichick or some of these previous defensive coordinators. And as the game kind of plays out, if they just try to turn him into a one-dimensional pocket passer, that could be the way that not only you're able to just kind of get some of these numbers that you're looking for in terms of sacks and everything else like that, but at the same point, it might be the best way to just see what this defensive plan is going to be moving forward in the season. And with that being said, let's switch gears here a little bit because I want to talk about 5 guys who could be Washington's first commit in 2027. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, which I'm a big fan of, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game even more exciting, whether you're watching your favorite team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off on organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. One thing that I noticed when I was using Monarch was just how many subscription services and streaming service that I was using, just that I was paying for and not using enough. And by canceling some of those, I was able to just afford that extra tub of protein powder and get back into living the healthy lifestyle that I want to. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. As we come down the home stretch here, I want to talk about some recruits because as I was pacing the sidelines before Saturday's game, I just saw recruits left and right. I heard from a source that there were maybe over 100 plus people that wound up being there. There were so many recruits on the sideline, and it was very clear that Jedd Fisch, Matt Doherty, Marcus Griffin, this entire coaching and recruiting staff has done a really good job of drumming up interest all around the country in Washington. And with that being said, let's jump into, I cheated here. I gave you 6 names. I said I was going to give you 5, but I couldn't do it. I'd give you a little bit extra in this regard that could be Washington's first commit in the 2027 class. And I want to start with 4-star offensive lineman Reis Russell from Colorado. This is a guy who, as I was getting ready to watch the dog walk, I was hanging out with our good buddy in front of the program, Alex Katzen, get ready for all that, just kind of look up to see somebody overlooking just the dog walk and that whole area of Husky Stadium. And of course, it's Reis Russell. He stands out right away with his hair and everything. It's truly majestic. And I look at this guy, and he's someone who is already named Washington as a co-leader alongside Nebraska, which he's scheduled to visit in a couple of weeks. And this is somebody who he's already got a whole lot of offers and a lot of interest from all over the country. But if he decides to pull the trigger rather soon, I'm not going to be surprised. This is just someone who seems to, I don't want to say be done with the recruiting process already. It just seems that he knows what he's looking for in a school. And when you're naming leaders like that this early in the process, it seems like those programs have already done a really good job of showing what you're looking for. And he's someone, especially who playing center, must be really interested in being the successor to Landon Hatchett. And Washington making a push for him like that this early in the process shows that they're very happy with what he brings to the table and what they're looking for on the interior with a player like this. So that's one name who, if they make a big push there to try to get his pledge really early in the 2027 cycle, again, I wouldn't be super surprised, mainly because who doesn't want to start with a big mauler in the trenches? I think that would be a really nice way to start off this class. So let's talk about another one. In local offensive lineman Gecova Doyal from Puyallup High School, who 4-star target, ranked number 3 in the state, I believe, by 247 Sports, and is just another one in that same mode as Reis Russell, who maybe plays guard at the next level, maybe he plays tackle. And I know I say, very similar things in some of these regards about a lot of these prospects, but it's true. This is what Matt Doherty and Washington's recruiting staff does so well. They identify body types, they identify just size and strength and some of these outlier metrics that they're looking for from certain prospects, and they bring them in and say, once you get on campus, then we're going to figure everything else out. Look at John Mills in this same light where, yeah, he looks like he might play tackle long-term at 6'6" and 320 pounds. But if you're happy with him right now at guard and you brought in an experienced transfer to play left tackle in Carver Willis, you can still find ways to get a guy like that on the field early. And I feel like that's the same thing with Gecova Doyal, where as this offensive line continues to grow, opportunities to get on the field early might continue to shrink. But at the same point, if you have a guy who you are very happy with in terms of physicality and everything like that, that's something that you want to just make sure you secure as soon as possible. And with Gecova, again, being down the road in Puyallup, Washington has done such a good job just trying to continue to build this in-state pipeline, which I know kind of went dormant for a few years at the end of the Jimmy Lake era. And then under Kalen DeBoer as well, there were so many opportunities to pick up talented players in state. Look at Rashawn Clark, a prime example of someone who there were different circumstances there in terms of why he originally committed to Cal and then flipped to Arizona before following Jedd Fisch and that coaching staff back up here. But in the same light, there are so many opportunities that you have to take advantage of talents in your backyard. And Gecova Doyal is one of those guys who you're going to want to try to build this class around in terms of big physical offensive linemen, where if you want to keep stacking that position with 3, 4, maybe even 5 bodies a year and let all those numbers sort themselves out in terms of the transfer portal, who plays early, who might need a year or two to redshirt, and who might eventually just not be able to see the field because of the guys that are ahead of them, this is the kind of player that you want to do that with. He is just such a fun, projectable body, whether he lines up at guard or at tackle, and keeping him close to home seems to be a top priority for this coaching staff. And I feel like you could say the same thing about Sione Kaho. This is where I cheated here a little bit. The 4-star quarterback from Lincoln High School in Tacoma, because he is such a talented thrower. I like him as an athlete, but this is where I had 6 instead of 5, because I wanted to lump him in with 4-star quarterback Caden Jones from Korean Lutheran High School in Southern California, because wrapping up your quarterback early is always a great way to start a recruiting class. And when I look at Sione, I see somebody who is a tremendous thrower of the football, someone who is really interested in staying close to home, staying on the West Coast, where Washington, Oregon, and Stanford seem to be the 3 leaders in the clubhouse for his services. And I feel like it might wind up coming down to Washington and Oregon. So something to keep an eye on there. But I want to throw Caden Jones into this boat because it's something that I wrote about over on Huskies Wire as it relates to 2028 5-star prospect Titan McNeil. Caden Jones is one of 2 prospects in recruiting, just in terms of every single class that's out there right now, that holds a dual sport offer from Washington. He holds an offer to play football, and he holds an offer to play basketball with someone who's going to play quarterback, and also has an offer from Danny Sprinkle to play point guard. Just speaks a lot to your intelligence, your athleticism, and all those different things. And for someone who is limited to 4 games during his sophomore season with a knee injury, he still holds 40 offers. This is a guy who has become wildly popular across the country, and it's very clear why Washington likes him. When you turn on the film from his very brief sophomore season, watching him get outside the pocket, it truly is a lot like watching Damon Williams in terms of the speed and athleticism that he brings to the field. I'm not comparing them by any stretch of the imagination because that's just unfair, but I think that that's one of the biggest things that they see in him, where he is a really nice thrower of the football. I would give Sione Kaho the edge in that department, but in terms of athleticism and fit in Jedd Fisch's scheme, I feel like Caden Jones might have the slight upper hand there. So you continue to recruit both those guys, along with Daniel Mielke, who seems to be the third option that Washington is considering at quarterback. One of those 3 guys is probably going to be Washington's commit in this class. So the matter here is, who is going to commit first? Who are you going to prioritize? And when is that going to happen? Because if it is a quarterback, I feel like that could come very soon. Having one of those guys in the boat is so important, especially when you think about recruiting skill positions and recruiting offensive linemen as well. Having someone who the offensive lineman and everybody else has a really good relationship with can be very, very important. So with that being said, let's talk about one of those skill players, and that's 4-star wide receiver Zarek Sidney from down in Arizona. This is the kind of guy who, I know I just mentioned it talking about offensive linemen, but when I look at just the type that, again, Matt Doherty, Jedd Fisch, Kevin Cummings, all these guys have in terms of wide receivers, Zarek Sidney perfectly fits that type, where he's listed at 6'185", I believe was his last measurement. And having a guy like this who can play inside and out a little bit, can play the Dorian Singer, Jacob Cowing, Giles Jackson role out of the slot where you can line them up in the Z as well and kind of move them between those two different spots in the formation, a lot like we saw with Desmond Roebuck, a lot like we saw with Raiden Vinesprite during the Colorado State game. Having someone who is a crisp route runner that can do all those little things really well and just be a reliable option for your quarterback, no matter where he is on the field, is so important. And it seems like Zarek Sidney is a guy that this coaching staff is really interested in continuing to just recruit and have, where I don't believe that Washington needs a whole lot of wide receivers in this 2027 class. But again, it's about stacking talent and on a year in, year out basis, getting as many talented players into the program as possible. And if Zarek Sidney is pushing Chris Lawson or Desmond Roebuck or Raiden Vinesprite or one of these other talented freshmen in the 2025 class for playing time in a year or two, that is a great problem to have. That's exactly what you want to see out of your positions, just no matter where you line them up, is just getting the most out of every single guy in the room. And if a younger guy takes your spot, that just means that you have an abundance of talent, which is exactly what this coaching staff is trying to do with this roster. So again, that brings us to our last guy, where you certainly want to make sure you're stacking talent at this position. And I want to talk about 4-star edge rusher Troy Bowens from Sumner High School down in Northern California. Sutter High School. This is a player who, no matter where you line him up in the formation, he is going to find a way to get pressure. At 6'4", 250 pounds and still growing, he might wind up on the interior in terms of, in Jedd Fisch's, Ryan Walter's schemes, either a 3-tech or a 5-tech. But at the same point, he is big enough, strong enough, athletic enough to play edge rusher if that's where you want him to be long term. So with a guy like that, it's just a matter of, you want to build this defensive line class with as much high-end talent as possible. And a lot of that is making sure you get in on these guys early. And that's exactly what this coaching staff has done with Troy Bowens. There are a whole bunch of other names that we can throw out in that department. I feel like a lot of everydayers are screaming at me right now, why aren't you talking about Tavita Nonu? And I feel like his recruitment might drag on a little bit longer through no fault of Jason Kafusi or Ryan Walters or anybody on Washington staff. This is just a guy who, being in the top 150 nationally and having the offer list that he does right now, where Washington and Notre Dame seem to be his two best offers by a landslide, I feel like this is the kind of kid where, why not take a little bit longer? I do feel like at the end of the day, he will wind up at Washington being a 4-star defensive tackle, which is by far Washington's biggest position of need right now. But at the same point, if he has another strong junior season, and a lot of these, Eastern powers want to get in the mix, Michigan, Ohio State, what have you, Penn State, whatever school you want to say wants to get in the mix, he has the ability and the time to take a little bit longer. But at the same point, so do all these other guys, which is why it's a matter of getting in on these players early on and saying, hey, look, this school that was in the college football playoff last season, they might wait to offer you and they might be really interested in you, but this is what we can do for you that these other schools can't. And I think in the 2025 and 2026 classes, this coaching staff has done a really good job of selling that. And that's why we saw 7 true freshmen play in the game against Colorado State. And those 7 guys will probably not wind up redshirting this season because this coaching staff did such a good job of selling them and then just seeing this high-end talent shine through during spring practice, during fall camp. And I feel like they're going to continue selling that to the classes of 2026, 2027, and beyond. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to subscribe, click that little bell as well as send us when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, make sure to leave us a 5-star review, leave a question, comment, concern, whatever you might have down below. I try to get back to as many of you as I can. And like I said, make sure you leave us a 5-star review on the audio only side of things because it really does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.